Commander Lee Hannah pressed her fingers against the control panel of her small ship, the Brave Dawn. The vessel hummed quietly as it moved through the colorful gases of the nebula. She had been alone in space for 3 months, mapping star systems that no human had ever seen before. Her job was simple: find new worlds and report back to Earth. The ship's computer made a soft beeping sound. Hannah looked at her screen and saw strange energy readings ahead. Something big was out there, hidden in the swirling clouds of space dust. She slowed her ship and tried to get a better look. Suddenly, the nebula lit up with bright flashes. Huge alien warships appeared from nowhere, their dark hulls covered in sharp spikes and glowing weapons. Hannah had never seen ships like these before. They were at least 10 times bigger than her small explorer vessel. Unknown ship. A harsh voice spoke through her radio in broken human language. You will stop. You will surrender. Hannah's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. This is Commander Lee Hannah, of the Earth Defense Force. I'm on a peaceful mission. The largest alien ship, Admiral Kethmer, looked at the tiny human vessel on his viewing screen. His forearms crossed over his armored chest as he studied the primitive craft. The Vorthok Empire had conquered dozens of worlds, and humans were just another weak species to add to their collection. Pathetic Kethmer said to his officers. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Disable their ship, but don't destroy it. I want to see what these humans look like. The alien warships moved closer, surrounding Hannah's ship like wolves circling prey. She knew she couldn't fight them or run away. Her small vessel had basic weapons that would be useless against their massive ships. Energy beams shot out from the alien vessels. They hit Hannah's ship with perfect accuracy, targeting her engines and weapon systems. The Brave Dawn shook violently as sparks flew from damaged control panels. The lights went out, then came back on as dim red emergency lighting. Hannah quickly typed commands into her computer. If she was going to be captured, she needed to send information back to Earth. Her fingers moved fast as she uploaded everything she had learned about these aliens, their ship designs, their weapons, their formation patterns. A small communication pod shot out from her ship, speeding away into space toward human territory. Too late, human. Admiral Kethmer's voice crackled through her damaged radio. No one will save you. Loud banging sounds came from the hull of Hannah's ship. The aliens were cutting through the metal walls. She could hear their heavy footsteps as they broke into her vessel. Hannah stood up slowly and raised her hands above her head. The bridge door exploded inward. Tall, insect-like creatures rushed in, their bodies covered in thick armor. They had 4 arms each, with sharp claws instead of fingers. Their faces were hidden behind metal masks that glowed with red lights. They carried energy weapons that hummed with deadly power. The lead alien pointed his weapon at Hannah. She was much smaller than they were, barely reaching their chest level. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a basic blue uniform with no armor or weapons. The aliens began talking to each other in their own language, making clicking and buzzing sounds. Hannah couldn't understand their words, but she could tell they were laughing at her. To them, she must have looked like a child playing with toys. One alien grabbed Hannah's arm with his clawed hand, but she didn't cry out or try to fight. Instead, she watched everything carefully. She noticed how their armor connected at the joints. She saw which aliens seemed to be the leader. She counted their weapons and studied how they moved. The aliens marched her through the corridors of their ship. The walls were made of dark metal, covered in strange symbols. The air smelled like chemicals and hot metal. Everything was built for creatures much larger than humans. They brought her to a large room where Admiral Kethmer waited. He was bigger than the other aliens, with scars covering his armor from many battles. His red eyes glowed as he looked at Hannah. So small, he said in human language. So weak. Your species will make good slaves. Hannah looked up at him without fear. You might be surprised. The Admiral laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Surprised. By you. We have destroyed civilizations that were far stronger than yours. We have weapons that can crack planets in half. What could one small human possibly do to the mighty Vorthok Empire? Hannah said nothing, but her dark eyes continued to study everything around her. She memorized the layout of the ship, the number of guards, the locations of control panels. Every detail was important. As the aliens dragged her away to a prison cell, none of them realized their mistake. They thought they had captured a helpless explorer. They had no idea that Commander Lee Hanna was a trained military officer who had spent years learning how to survive behind enemy lines. The Vorthok Empire had just made their first and last mistake with humanity. They had given their enemy a chance to study them from the inside. The prison cell was cold and dark. The walls were made of thick metal with no windows. A single light hung from the ceiling, casting strange shadows on the floor. Commander Hanna sat on the hard metal bench that served as both chair and bed. She had been in this cell for 2 days now. Most prisoners would be scared or angry, but Hannah was busy. She watched the guards who brought her food. She noticed they'd changed shifts every 6 hours. The first guard was lazy and often looked at his communicator instead of watching her. The second guard was more careful, but he always stood in the same spot by the door. The third guard was young and nervous, jumping at every sound. Hannah also studied the cell itself. The door had 3 locks, one electronic, one mechanical, and one that required a special key card. The walls looked strong, but she found a small crack near the floor where the metal plates joined together. The air vent in the ceiling was too small for her to crawl through, but it might be useful for other things. The door opened with a loud hiss. A large alien walked in, followed by 2 guards. This alien was different from the others. His armor was covered in deep scars and dents from many battles. His red eyes glowed brighter, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. "I am General Volthik," the alien said in rough human language. "I have destroyed 12 worlds. I have made slaves of millions. Now I want to know about your people." Hannah looked up at him calmly. "What do you want to know?" The general was surprised. Most prisoners cowered when they met him. Some cried, some begged for their lives. Some tried to attack him in desperate rage. But this small human just sat there, as if they were having a normal conversation. "Tell me about your military," Volumthak demanded. "How many ships do you have? What weapons do you use? Where are your bases?" "I'm just an explorer," Hannah said. "I map stars and planets. I don't know much about military things." She paused and tilted her head. "But I'm curious about something. How do you control so many different worlds? It must be very difficult." Volthik's forearms crossed over his chest. No prisoner had ever asked him questions before. "You want to know about the Vorthok Empire?" "Yes," Hannah nodded. "It's impressive. You must be very smart to keep so many species under control." The general's chest puffed out with pride. Like most warriors, he enjoyed talking about his victories. "We are the strongest species in the galaxy. Our technology is far beyond yours. Our discipline is perfect. Our strategy is flawless." "How do you fight your battles?" Hannah asked, leaning forward with interest. Volthik began to pace around the small cell. "We use overwhelming force. Our ships attack in formation. We destroy the enemy's main fleet first, then capture their important planets. Any world that resists is burned to ash as an example to others." "That makes sense," Hannah said. "Direct attack. Get the biggest ships and the most powerful weapons, then hit the enemy hard and fast." "Exactly," Volthik said. "We have conquered every species we have met using these methods. Some try to hide, some try to run, some try to make deals. But, in the end, they all surrender when they see our power." Hannah nodded thoughtfully. "Your ships are very large. I saw them when you captured me. They must have huge crews." "The smallest ship has 300 warriors," Volumthak boasted. The largest has over 5,000. Each warrior is trained from birth to follow orders without question. We move as one mind, one will, and your weapons. Energy cannons that can destroy a city with one shot. Missile systems that can crack a moon. Shields that can stop any attack. The general gestured with his clawed hands. We also have ground forces, heavily armored soldiers with personal energy weapons. Nothing can stand against us. What about smaller enemies? Hannah asked. Ships like mine, or small groups of fighters? Volthik laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping against stone. Small enemies are not worth our time. We crush them like insects. A single shot from our main guns can destroy 50 of your tiny ships. But what if they don't fight you directly? What if they hide and attack your supply lines, or sabotage your equipment when you're not looking? The general stopped pacing. Such cowardly tactics are beneath us. We are warriors, not sneaking thieves. We fight with honor, face to face, strength against strength. Of course, Hannah said quickly. I was just curious. Your way is much more impressive. Volthik smiled, showing sharp teeth. You are smarter than most prisoners, human. You understand that the Vorthok way is superior. He turned to leave, then stopped. Tomorrow we will talk more. You will tell me about your homeworld and your people's weaknesses. After the general left, Hannah sat quietly in her cell. She now knew many important things about her captors. They relied on big ships and direct attacks. They had never fought an enemy that used guerrilla tactics. Their warriors were trained to follow orders, not to think for themselves. They were proud and easily flattered. Most importantly, they thought humans were weak and cowardly. That was their biggest mistake. They had no idea that sometimes the smallest enemy could be the most dangerous one. On the 5th night, Hannah was ready. She had spent days watching and learning. The lazy guard would come on duty in 1 hour. He always stood by the door and played games on his small computer device instead of watching her carefully. Hannah picked up her metal food tray from dinner. Over the past few days, she had been slowly bending one corner of the tray back and forth. The metal was getting weak and sharp. Tonight, she bent it until it broke off completely. Now she had a thin piece of metal that was sharp on one end and flat on the other. The guard arrived exactly on time. Through the small window in her door, Hannah could see him lean against the wall and pull out his device. The screen glowed as he started playing his game. Hannah crawled to the corner of her cell, where she had found the crack in the wall. She pushed her makeshift tool into the crack and felt around until she found what she was looking for, the power cable that fed electricity to her cell's systems. She had watched the Vorthok work on their equipment during her interrogations. Their technology was advanced, but it worked on the same basic principles as human machines. Too much power in the wrong place would cause an overload. Hannah carefully stripped the protective covering off the power cable, using her sharp metal tool. The exposed wires sparked slightly. She took a deep breath and jammed the flat end of her tool across both wires at the same time. The explosion was loud and bright. Sparks flew everywhere as the power systems overloaded. The lights in her cell went out completely. She heard the guard outside scream in pain and surprise, then a heavy thud as he fell to the floor. Smoke filled the corridor as emergency lights flickered on and off. Hannah pushed against her cell door. The electronic locks had failed in the explosion. The door opened easily. The guard lay on the floor, not moving. His armor was burned black from the electrical explosion. Hannah took his weapon and his keycard, then started moving through the ship. Most prisoners would have run straight for the escape pods, but Hannah was not most prisoners. She was a trained soldier, and she knew that just escaping would not be enough. The Vorthok would catch her again, and they would be ready for her tricks next time. She needed to do something they would never forget. Hannah made her way deeper into the ship, instead of toward the exits. She used the keycard to open doors, and avoided the main corridors, where other guards might see her. The ship was huge, but She had memorized the layout from her conversations with General VOL. Single quotes, THEK. After 20 minutes of careful movement, she reached the engineering section. This was the heart of the ship, the place where all the important systems were controlled. Large machines hummed and beeped as they kept the massive vessel running. A few Vorthok engineers were working at control panels. They looked up in surprise when they saw Hannah. Before they could call for help, she pointed the stolen weapon at them. "Don't move," she said in their language. She had learned a few important words during her captivity. The engineers raised their hands and backed away from their stations. Hannah moved to the main control console. The screen was covered with symbols she didn't understand, but the layout was similar to human ships. Power systems, life support, gravity control, communications, they were all connected. Hannah began typing commands into the system. She couldn't read Vorthok writing, but she could follow the power flow diagrams on the screen. She found the maintenance protocols that Vorthok had mentioned during their talks. The Vorthok were so confident in their technology that they had automatic systems to fix small problems. But what if those same systems caused problems instead of fixing them? Hannah changed the settings in the maintenance computer. Instead of keeping power levels stable, the system would now increase them randomly. Instead of keeping the air clean, it would mix different gases together. Instead of maintaining steady gravity, it would fluctuate up and down. She worked quickly, knowing that more guards would come looking for her soon. Each change she made would cause the next system to malfunction, which would trigger more automatic repairs, which would cause more problems. The lights in the engineering section began to flicker. One of the Vorthok engineers started to speak, but his voice was cut off as the gravity suddenly changed. Everyone floated toward the ceiling for a moment, then crashed back down to the floor. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights flashed red as system after system began to fail. The air started to smell strange as the life support systems mixed the wrong chemicals together. Hannah ran from the engineering section as chaos spread through the ship. Vorthok crew members stumbled through corridors as the gravity kept changing. Some areas of the ship went completely dark as power failed. Others became too bright as electrical systems overloaded. She reached the hangar bay, where small maintenance pods were kept. These tiny ships were used for repairs outside the main vessel. Hannah climbed into one and started the engines. The hangar doors were stuck closed because of the system failures, but the maintenance pod had cutting tools. Hannah used them to burn through the metal doors, then flew out into space. Behind her, the massive Vorthok flagship spun slowly out of control. Its lights flickered randomly. Small explosions appeared along its hull as more systems failed. General Volthik stood on the bridge, watching Hannah's small pod disappear into the colorful gases of the nebula. Around him, his crew tried desperately to fix their ship, but every repair they made only caused new problems. For the first time in his long military career, Volthik felt afraid. This small human had done something impossible. She had turned their own advanced technology against them, using nothing but a piece of broken food tray and clever thinking. He finally understood that humans were not weak prey. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors, who could adapt to any situation. Admiral Kethmer stood on the bridge of his new flagship, staring at the star maps with growing anger. Red marks covered the display, showing attacks on Vorthok positions across the entire sector. Each mark represented a failure, a humiliation that made his reputation weaker. "Send 3 full battle groups," he ordered his officers. "Every available ship in this sector, find that human and bring her back alive." The hunt began immediately. 90 Vorthok warships spread across space, searching every asteroid field, every moon, every hidden corner where a small maintenance pod might hide. They had sensors that could detect a single ship from millions of miles away. They had weapons that could destroy entire fleets. How hard could it be to catch one escaped prisoner? But Hannah was no longer just hiding. She had become something much more dangerous. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. A supply convoy carrying food and weapons to Vorthok outposts simply disappeared. The escort ships found nothing but empty space where the convoy should have been. No wreckage, no distress signals, no clues about what had happened. Impossible, General Volthik said when he heard the news. Our sensors would have detected any attack. There were 20 ships in that convoy, with full military escorts. But the attacks continued. Communication relays that connected distant Vorthok worlds went silent, one by one. Outposts reported strange equipment failures that always happened at the worst possible times. Guard shifts would find their weapons mysteriously empty of power. Life support systems would fail just when reinforcements were arriving. The Vorthok soldiers began to feel afraid. They were used to fighting enemies they could see and shoot at. But how do you fight an enemy who strikes from nowhere and vanishes, like smoke? Then the broadcasts began. Hannah's voice reached every world in the sector, carried by the same communication systems the Vorthok used to control their empire. She spoke in different languages, not just human, but the languages of all the species the Vorthok had conquered. "My name is Commander Lee Hannah," her voice said clearly, through speakers on a dozen worlds. "I am human, and I was captured by the Vorthok Empire, but I escaped, and I learned something important. They are not as strong as they want you to believe." On the mining world of Karas, the blue-skinned Kurani workers stopped their digging to listen. They had been slaves for 50 years, forced to dig precious metals for their Vorthok masters. "Every system has weak points," Hannah's voice continued. "Every empire has cracks. The Vorthok are powerful, but they depend completely on their technology, and technology can be turned against them. In the factories of Morvac Prime, the insect-like Zephyrians paused in their work. They had been building weapons for the Vor for 3 generations, never daring to hope for freedom. "Look around you," Hannah said. "You build their ships. You mine their metals. You grow their food. You know their systems better than they do. You have the power to stop them, if you choose to use it." Admiral Kethmer tried to shut down the broadcasts, but they came from everywhere and nowhere. Hannah had learned to use the Vorthok's own communication network against them, bouncing her signal from relay to relay so they could never trace the source. The first rebellion started on Karas. The Kurani workers discovered that their mining equipment could be turned into weapons. Drilling machines became cannons. Transport vehicles became armored fighting vehicles. Within hours, they had driven the Vorthok garrison from their world. On Morvok Prime, the Zephyrians did something even more clever. Instead of attacking directly, they began building flaws into the weapons they made for the Vorthok guns that would overheat after a few shots. Ship engines that would fail at critical moments. Armor that would crack under pressure. "This is impossible," Kethmer roared, as reports came in from across his territory. "One escaped prisoner cannot cause all this chaos." But General Volthik was beginning to understand the truth. "She is not just causing chaos," he said quietly. "She is teaching them. Every species we have conquered is learning from her example." The Vorthok military, built for fighting large battles against enemy fleets, found themselves trying to fight a war they didn't understand. Their enemies were everywhere and nowhere. When they sent troops to one world, 3 others would rebel. When they fixed one problem, 5 new ones would appear. Meanwhile, far away in human space, Captain Park Minho read the data transmission that Hannah had sent before her capture. His eyes widened as he studied the information about Vorthok ships, weapons, and tactics. "Get me the Defense Council immediately," he told his communications officer, "and start preparing the fleet. All of it." The message Hannah had sent contained detailed information about Vorthok technology and military doctrine. But more importantly, it contained coordinates, the exact location where she had been captured, and the route the Vorthok ships had taken back to their territory. Captain Park studied the star charts and began planning. The Vorthok thought they were hunting one escaped prisoner. They had no idea that Commander Lee Hanna had given humanity everything they needed to find and destroy the alien fleet. The hunt was about to become something very different. The Vorthok had made their first mistake by capturing a human intelligence officer. Their second mistake was assuming that humans, like other species they had conquered, would wait to be rescued instead of coming to fight. But their biggest mistake was not understanding what Commander Hanna had really accomplished. She had not just escaped from their prison. She had turned their entire empire into a weapon pointed at their own hearts. And now, that weapon was about to be used. Admiral Kethmer felt satisfied as his battle group surrounded the asteroid belt. After weeks of hunting, they had finally cornered the escaped human. Her stolen maintenance pod was trapped between 3 massive Vorthok warships, with nowhere to run. Human, Kethmer spoke into his communicator. Your games are over. Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Commander Hanna's voice came back calm and steady. I don't think so. Kethmer was about to order his ships to fire, when his sensor officers shouted in alarm. Admiral, new contacts dropping out of hyperspace. The space around the asteroid belt suddenly filled with ships. Not the massive spike-covered vessels of the Vorthok Empire, but smaller, sleeker craft that moved with deadly grace. 50 human warships appeared as if from nowhere, their hulls painted in dark colors that made them hard to see against the stars. This is Admiral Kim Dae-ho of the Human Defense Fleet, a new voice announced over the communication channels. You have something that belongs to us. Kethmer stared at his screens in shock. The human ships were unlike anything in the Vorthok military databases. They were smaller than Vorthok vessels, but there were so many of them, and they moved in ways that seemed impossible, some flying alone, others in small groups, all of them constantly changing position. How did you find us? Kethmer demanded. Admiral Kim's voice was ice cold. Commander Hanna sent us very detailed directions, along with everything else we needed to know about your empire. The truth hit Kethmer like a physical blow. The human's capture had not been an accident. It had been planned. She had let herself be taken so she could study the Vorthok from the inside and send that information back to her people. Impossible, he whispered. No species would sacrifice one of their own for intelligence. You don't understand humans very well, Hannah's voice cut in from her small pod. We don't abandon our people, and we don't forget our enemies. The battle began without warning. The human ships attacked from all directions at once, but not in the organized formations that Vorthok doctrine expected. Instead, they fought like a swarm of angry insects, each ship acting independently, but somehow working together. 3 human fighters dove toward Kethmer's flagship, firing rapid bursts from their weapons. The admiral ordered his gunners to return fire, but the human ships were already gone, replaced by different attackers coming from another angle. Sir, his weapons officer called out, they're using the asteroids as cover. Our main guns can't target them. Kethmer watched in growing horror as human ships darted between the floating rocks, appearing just long enough to fire their weapons before disappearing again. When his ships tried to follow, the humans would somehow appear behind them instead. One human destroyer flew straight at a Vorthok cruiser, as if planning to ram it. The Vorthok captain prepared for impact, but at the last second, the human ship fired its engines and spun sideways, raking the cruiser's hull with weapons fire as it passed. The attack damaged the cruiser's shields and left it vulnerable to follow-up strikes. This is not how civilized species fight. General Volvic protested from his position on the bridge. Where is their formation? Where is their discipline? But Admiral Kim's ships didn't care about Vorthok ideas of proper warfare. A group of human fighters grabbed asteroids with tractor beams and hurled them at Vorthok ships like massive stone bullets. Another human vessel hid inside a cloud of space dust, then emerged to attack a Vorthok supply ship that thought it was safe. The Vorthok tried to respond with their standard tactics. They formed their ships into battle lines and concentrated their firepower on single targets. But the humans refused to cooperate with these plans. When the Vorthok focused on one group of human ships, 3 other groups would attack from different directions. Kethmer's flagship shuddered as human weapons found their mark. "Damage report," he shouted. "Shields failing. Hull breaches on decks. 7 and 12. The humans are targeting our weak points. They know exactly where to hit us." Of course they did. Commander Hannah had studied Vorthok ships for days while she was their prisoner. She had learned every weakness, every vulnerable spot, every system that could be exploited, and she had shared all of that knowledge with her people. Explosions lit up space as Vorthok ships began to fall. The humans fought with a creativity and flexibility that the rigid Vorthok military had never encountered. They turned their smaller size into an advantage, using speed and unpredictability instead of raw firepower. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from Captain Jektar and Commander Vashalin. Their ships are badly damaged." Kethmer looked around at his burning bridge. Half his battle group was destroyed or disabled. The humans had achieved in 1 hour what should have been impossible against superior Vorthok technology. Through his viewport, he could see Commander Hannah's small maintenance pod flying safely among the human ships. She had never been his prisoner, at all. From the moment of her capture, she had been gathering intelligence and planning this moment. "Admiral," General Volthik said quietly, "we have underestimated this species completely." As his flagship's systems failed around him, Kethmer finally understood the truth. The Vorthok Empire had built their reputation on overwhelming force and technological superiority. They had conquered species that fought like themselves, with large fleets and predictable tactics. But humans were different. They didn't accept defeat. They didn't follow the rules. They turned every disadvantage into a weapon and every weakness into strength. The first human the Vorthok Empire had captured would be the last enemy they ever underestimated. Commander Lee Hannah had shown them that humanity's greatest weapon was not their ships or their guns. It was their refusal to give up.